my friend, Deputy Secretary Dan Poneman.
Well, thank you, Senator Warner, for that overly generous introduction. It's actually a very exciting moment for me to be here today. I am now a Virginian. I've lived in Virginia for well over 20 years. My children were born and raised there, as Senator Warner indicated. What he may not know is when I was in 5th grade, we got to do a state project. And you got to choose your state, and I chose Virginia. Virginia, I was from Ohio at that point, and Virginia was the other state that had a claim to the title of the mother of presidents. Now, if you kind of count it up, depends who gets to have Benjamin Harrison, you know, and William Henry Harrison. But when you kind of stacked up toe-to-toe, you had George Washington, Rutherford B. Hayes, right? Thomas Jefferson, William McKinley, James Madison, Ulysses Grant. So I think it would be fair to say that I chose ultimately the state that had the better presidents. But a president I did not know until this morning was President Harvey. And it was quite an experience to meet him. The adjectives that Senator Warner applied about passion and relentlessness actually aren't a bad description of Senator Warner. But I have experienced already, and I know much more about geothermal on this particular campus than I did last night. And his leadership here has been, from what I've learned in my brief experience, extraordinary. We are also fortunate here today to have our own Chief of Protocol from the Department of Energy, James McCullough, who attended this institution. So how about a round of applause for our Virginians? I spoke very glancingly of Thomas Jefferson, but in a way I think he'd be pleased to know that Senator Warner has organized this summit. He was a true polymath. In those days, it was possible to be expert in all the great fields of human knowledge, in philosophy, in science, in governance. In fact, you could go to the Library of Congress today, and they have Thomas Jefferson's library from his home transported to the Library of Congress, and you will see from geography to geology every era of history represented. You may all remember the story when John Kennedy hosted all the Nobel laureates at the White House. He said, "This is the greatest collection of intellect in the White House since Thomas Jefferson dined alone." And it's relevant because what it speaks to is the ability to see across stovepipes, something that Senator Warner just spoke very eloquently to in describing in far more compelling terms than I could the 5 reasons why it was important to call this meeting here today. We haven't always seen the connections between energy, prosperity, national security, but they are there, and they are there to be discovered. As Senator Warner said, he did manage to eke out a living in cell phones. And it's because, to paraphrase Wayne Gretzky, he saw where the hockey puck was going. Senator Warner was, like me a couple years before or after, a law student. Now, he could have done the Wall Street law firm thing, had, I'm sure, very attractive opportunities, but as President Nixon might have said, that would have been the easy thing to do. He went off in this, whoever could think this would be a useful idea area, and we all know the results. So we have the old saying, when E.F. Hutton talks, everyone listens. If you hear Senator Warner say, "I think energy is the place to go in investment strategies," you should listen. And here's why. And I'm challenged here today because his vision is so good that he seems to have gotten a copy of my remarks and said almost all the things I was going to say. But I will soldier on. And I must, because as he said, we know each other. I'm going to pause here just for one more second about Senator Warner, because when you are camping with your kids in the woods, we were just anybody's. So I can tell you that in Mark Warner, Virginia has a senator of intelligence, of integrity, of dedication. And just as important for Virginia today, he is in the tradition that sees the American interests. And he's right, I did work for President Bush Sr., and my last visit to the area, to an undisclosed location, was to witness the commissioning of the aircraft carrier George Herbert Walker Bush CVN 77, and I note the service of our colleagues here from the Navy, and we honor that. And I worked for President Clinton. And Mark understands that if we are to succeed as a nation in defeating the forces of nuclear weapons proliferation, in defeating and mitigating the threat of catastrophic climate change, we will have to work together. He also understands the role of technology, of innovation, of cooperation in achieving those outcomes. So before I go further, I just want to pause and, in gratitude, as a fellow Virginian, ask for a round of applause for our Senator, Mark Warner. And although I now know, and I'm fully warned by Senator Warner and others, that President Harvey will be relentless in coming after me on these other issues, I want President Harvey to know that I know those stories about Adam's house. So we have what strategic people call mutual assured destruction. Why is this important? When Secretary Chu asked me to come work with him and serve the president, serve the country, I could not say no, because the issues that we face, the threat of potentially catastrophic climate change, the threat of having our fate controlled not by ourselves, but by sellers of hydrocarbons from countries that wish us harm, the threat of an economy sagging because of an inability to see where the puck is going and to take those innovative steps that people in this room are going to lead us toward. I knew I had to say yes. These are not only the most important issues for the country, they're the most important issues for the planet. And I remember Secretary Chu saying, most of us, myself, Secretary Chu, many people here, are the children or grandchildren of immigrants. And the whole way our parents have thought is, can I leave a better world? Can I make a better life for my children and their children? Our generation has a bigger challenge. Can we at least preserve a climate that's worth saving? Can we ensure that we don't see continued attrition of biodiversity, rising sea levels, acid in the oceans? And because we're Americans, we must say yes. And we must embrace that challenge, and we will. But it will not happen without the hard work and collaboration of people from the entrepreneurial side, yes, the federal government, state officials, and people who actually have the scientific grounding to come up with the new ideas to glue this all together. You're all here. That's why this meeting is important. And I want to thank Governor Warner, Senator Warner, Your Excellency Warner, and President Harvey for hosting this. When I was still an undergraduate, President Nixon warned of the dangers of excessive oil dependence. That was 1973. At that point, the United States relied on foreign oil to satisfy 30% of its domestic requirements. Now, all these years later, we're at 60%. And the sad thing is, not only have we missed the opportunity to get our arms around that problem of overdependence on foreign resources, but as Senator Warner indicated, at the same time, we've seen opportunities go overseas that could have been, should have been American opportunities. And he already told you, solar to Germany, battery technology to Japan, nuclear energy in France. Spain gets a third of its power from wind. Again, that can be and that will be America, because now we have a beam on the problem. The people understand it. We have a president who understands it. And we are blessed with a Nobel laureate as Secretary of Energy, who not only understands the challenge, but has unbelievably smart ideas about how to tackle it. In coming years, we're going to see tens of thousands of windmills built across the country. We're going to see growing demand for automobiles that don't produce all the greenhouse gas emissions that are raising particulate matter in the atmosphere. And we are now taking steps to make sure that the United States plays its role, a leadership role, in taking advantage of the opportunities at the same time that we mitigate the threats. According to a recent study by the Pew Charitable Trust, jobs in the renewable energy industry grew at twice the national rate over the past decade. Now, how are we doing this? Once again, as Senator Warner indicated, it has taken a lot of work by a lot of people across party lines, and I want to thank him and the leadership he showed in the Senate in getting the Recovery Act passed, because that is providing the seed corn to drive the innovation that's going to lead us to that clean energy future. $38.7 billion in grant and loan authority. The Department of Energy had a, if you will, a baseline budget of somewhere around $24 billion. This additional $38 billion has made, as Secretary Chu likes to say, has made us rather popular around town. But it's important in a number of dimensions. The Recovery Act is financing investments in energy efficiency. Senator Warner called it today the low-hanging fruit. Secretary Chu likes to call it the fruit that's lying on the ground. Buildings produce 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions. The weatherization investments that we can make in homes and buildings and in factories can make a tremendous dent in greenhouse gas emissions. The Recovery Act is funding that, and I will come back to that a little bit later with a more local nuance. The Recovery Act is also driving investments in new technologies, and I should say here that we have Skyla Harris and Molly Lund from the Department of Energy who will be participating in panels and discuss this in much greater detail later on today. We're talking about investments in batteries. We're talking about investments in wind turbines, in smart grid. You need that smart grid if we're to do what we must do in terms of doubling the contribution that renewable energy sources make to our economy, because I'm learning as a budding energy economist, it's not the energy source that's expensive, it's getting the energy applied at a certain place and time that you need it that's expensive. And so for us to tap solar and wind and waves to the degree that is necessary, we have to find a way to store through batteries, for example, or transport through better grids that energy to the place where the people need it. Now we have two challenges in implementing our responsibilities under the Recovery Act. One is getting the money out quickly, because again, as Senator Warner indicated, one of the reasons we are doing this is to get our economy moving again and to create jobs now. But secondly, we have to spend it wisely. We are very, very mindful. We are your stewards. You are the taxpayers. You have entrusted us with the funds to make this investment in our energy future. And we need to be transparent, and we need to be accountable. And I invite you all to come to our website, www.recovery.gov. We're setting up call centers. You can find us at the Department of Energy, and we will be responsive because we know that you are our bosses and we are your fiduciaries. All told, under the Recovery Act, we're investing $11 billion in weatherization and other energy efficiency investments. The President announced $2.4 billion for advanced batteries and transport electrification. Secretary Chu announced $1.2 billion for science, and I'm very excited to go to visit the Thomas Jefferson Lab here later today. And Secretary Chu also announced $3.9 billion going to smart grid. At the national level, and some of you may not know this yet, we had a major step forward yesterday. One of the things we've been working on very hard is to break down the stovepipes, not only among thinking about science and energy and security, but also around Washington. It may surprise you to know that there are some stovepipes among the federal agencies. Actually, we don't call them stovepipes anymore. We call them cylinders of excellence. So, for example, in Denver, I was with Secretary Solis and Secretary Donovan and the DOE, Department of Energy, Housing and Urban Development, and Labor Departments have announced an MOU. And the Vice President, as Senator Warner knows, is very focused on making sure if we have a weatherization fund, how do the workers know about it? So we're working with the Labor Department to make sure that the job centers they have the information on the programs that we have and bring an education to teach people how to do it. In that spirit, yesterday, Secretary Chu and Secretary Geithner of the Department of Treasury announced a program that will provide direct payments for renewable energy investments in energy efficiency in lieu of tax credits. So for all of you innovators out there, instead of having to wait until you have to file your return and put the tax credit and get the payback at the end, as part of the recovery process, we are talking about what we expect to be over $3 billion worth of investments in which you will be able to get direct payments from the federal government under this program in lieu of a tax credit. That should get the job done in terms of bringing the carbon low technologies to the fore and bringing jobs to the fore quicker than otherwise would have been the case. Now, you have a lot of panels here, and I'm determined to stop talking before you stop listening. So I guess, having been foreshadowed, I'd better get to the Virginia part. And this is news, so I'm about to commit news, as they say. And I am pleased to announce that Virginia is receiving today more than $37 million for weatherization under the Recovery Act. This is the second installment in a series of payments that are going to total $94 million dedicated to Virginia in weatherization funds. These investments will allow the weatherization of 8,600 homes. And as Senator Warner said, you're going to make this investment today, and the benefits are going to accrue year after year after year. This is an investment in our future. These kinds of investments are really a three-for-one win because they save on energy bills, they reduce dependence on foreign oil, and they stimulate economic growth today. This is part of a national program where we're announcing today $448 million for weatherization and more than $141 million for state energy programs. Overall, Virginia is slated to receive $300 million through the Recovery Act, and that does include $65 million for the Thomas Jefferson National Accelerator Facility right here in Newport News, where I'm leaving to visit right after this session. In addition, $70 million in state energy program funds will go to Virginia for use in energy efficiency improvements and retrofits. It's going to provide money for rebates for homeowners, to provide for the insulation, improved furnaces, and all the kinds of modest investments which sort of step by step, house by house, block by block, are going to reduce that dangerous dependence on foreign oil. And in addition, $61 million is also going to Virginia under the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, and as I indicated earlier, my colleagues here from the Department of Energy will be more than happy to talk to you about the specifics of those programs in the sessions that they will be speaking at in a few moments. I want to just conclude. This is what it's all about. I think what was clear in Senator Warner's opening remarks is that no policy of the United States whose success is going to be measured in decades and even centuries will succeed unless it has broad bipartisan support, unless you have government, industry, entrepreneurs, financial markets, scientists, all pulling together. Sometimes I think of this in terms analogous to the Cold War. We did not know in 1945 how that was going to turn out. We had a set of leaders who had wisdom, and yes, they had vision. There's a book written about them, The Wise Men, written by Walter Isaacson, who also wrote about Einstein and Benjamin Franklin. Dean Acheson, John McCloy, Chip Bolin, George Kennan. They did not know how it would turn out, but they saw the threat of Soviet communism. And it's easy now to look back and say it was inevitable that we would win, but it was not. They came up with a strategy of containment that was sustained by every U.S. president. And Senator Arthur Vandenberg, who personified the notion that politics should stop at the water's edge, was seminal in bringing the Congress together with the president, which is what we need today. And we made the investments in our defense, and it was a lot. And it was a huge drain on our resources. The TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, 10% of the nation's electricity was dedicated to creating highly enriched uranium to support our deterrent to stop Soviet aggression. The Marshall Plan was a tremendous drain on resources to get Europe back on its feet. We put together an organization. Many of you may not even remember it. It was called COCOM, the Coordinating Committee on East-West Trade. And it seems hard to believe, but we would sit around a conference room and the French would say, we're going to sell such and such a technology to Romania. And we would say, I don't think that's a good idea. And they would say, okay, I won't then. Can you imagine that degree of cooperation? We're going to need it again. We're going to need it in Copenhagen. We're going to need it as we're doing the kinds of investments we're talking about here today. Won't happen if people don't work together. Won't happen if you don't have the leadership like you have from President Harvey and from Senator Warner. It's all about you. The older I get, the more I realize it comes down to the individuals, to the vision, to the passion, to the very things we heard about earliest remarks this morning from President Harvey and Senator Warner. So I don't want to stop you from having those conversations. I want to encourage them. I want to thank you all for coming to something that I think was imperative that Mark Warner has created here, a forum for you to have these kinds of discussions. I want you to go out there and innovate, meet each other in the hallways, and thank you all for your attention and wish you Godspeed in something that really is the most important task that all of us face in the world. Thank you.